It's Wellness Wednesday. It's Wellness Wednesday. And maybe singing that will get the Gallivant overture out of my head. Love that show. Every time I watch it, oh my god, this song is stuck in my head. Gallivant. If you haven't seen Gallivant, it is difficult to find, but season 1 is on YouTube. Okay, so that's not what we're talking about. Kind of talking about it, but we're talking about self-blame, why we do it, and how to stop, cut down. We'll go with cut down at first, because self-blame happens for reasons. If there weren't reasons people do it, far fewer people would do it. It's one of those, I've been using this phrase a lot lately. It's one of these things that makes 100% emotional sense and absolutely zero logical sense. And if we can, get into the emotional sense, show why people do this, and, how there's a better way to meet the same emotional need, well, that then behavior changes. And that's something that a lot of mental health stuff gets wrong. This idea that thought stopping remotely works, that repetition alone will totally change behaviors. I have found that none of that, it wasn't true in my case. What would happen is I'd do well for a while, and then some really, really bad thing would happen. And because I'd get overwhelmed, I'd, reset to old patterns. Then it'd be like, well, you always end up here. It's hopeless. And that's a narrative, right? Instead of going, well, okay, you went another 3 months instead of 1 the last time. That's improvement. And that's where the whole relapse is a part of recovery refrain comes from. But having feelings and getting overwhelmed isn't a relapse. It's something that happens in life. So I'm going to talk about self-blame, why we do it, what to do about it. I'll do the help support this channel. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. The headphone fund is still going on. I'm researching the Razer Black Shark right now. That seems to be one with a good microphone. I mean, it's Razer, right? So it'll be awesome and then it'll break. But I didn't get much time out of the Corsair headset I bought. So I think they're probably all like that. Anyway, I digress. But okay, so self-blame. Self-blame is not the same as accountability. Accountability is just going, okay, I don't like how that turned out. What can I do differently so that I make new mistakes going forward instead of the same ones again and again and again? It doesn't have to focus on, fault. It doesn't have to focus on good or bad person territory. It's just, how do I learn and grow from this experience? Whereas self-blame is like everybody's inner Homer Simpson going, stupid, stupid, stupid. Right. And we all have moments like that. But we all know that, when we're not doing well, we're still blaming ourselves for stuff years, sometimes after the fact. And at least for me, that was a need for control. And we treat a need for control as a bad thing, but it's not everybody. And that's something that trauma therapy really, really helped with, recognizing that everybody needs to feel a certain amount of control over their own life. We can't constantly feel like things are just going to spiral into chaos after one false move, one bad step. And that is, it's completely understandable. No one can expect absolute control over everything. because we don't control other people. We don't control the weather. There's lots of things we don't control, right? But we should feel like at least things are remotely fair sometimes. And at least for me, that sometimes that what I can control is, the people I have some say about who are around me. And so that requires, periodic check-ins to go, is this person, not is this a good or bad person, but is this person good or bad for me? Are they a good influence on me? Are they, giving more than they take? And, recognizing that every relationship needs a certain amount of work, and giving grace for other people's quirks. If you do that, then you should be able to make some space for your own. But a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are too forgiving of other people and not forgiving enough of themselves. And so then they attract people who you do one thing they don't like, they brand you as this horrible thing. And, part of it lands because you self-blame. And I do believe that there are certain people that, I think they're driven by a lot of guilt themselves. And so they just assume everybody else is. And so they just think that that's what everybody does. They just find this, "You're terrible" comment, and they just wedge and wedge and wedge. And a good way to tell whether that's happening is to look at it and examine it, and can they actually support their claim? If they're accusing you of being selfish, for instance, well, can they give an example that's going to stand up to scrutiny? Because, oh, you needed 7 hours sleep that night instead of staying up with me all night because I was having a crisis. That's not selfish, that's health. That's the sort of thing. If people have to be able, with a certain amount of brevity and clarity, explain what the problem is. If they give a 5,000 word essay about what the issue is, something's up, right? Because if their justification looks like one of those conspiracy theory boards, because, oh, she said this, but she really meant this, and that ties into this from the 18th century, and that's bullshit. It should be a fairly straight line. And once we start examining this stuff, then, like I said, you get the logical sense coming into it as opposed to the emotional sense. Because, again, self-blame is something that makes 100% emotional sense. You want to be diligent. You don't want to let yourself off the hook. You want to be accountable. You want to behave honorably. All this stuff makes absolute sense on an emotional level. But we know that self-blame taken to a certain extent actually makes us physically ill. And among other things, it affects our sleep. It gives us nightmares, all this stuff. And when we look at it that way, then we start seeing a reason to make those changes. Because sleep is fundamental. If you're not sleeping, it's hard to do anything else. And I know one of the things that I was really worried about is things like sleep aids. Because, addicts in the family are afraid of anything that's potentially addictive. But, as long as you're not taking them every night, or if you have to reset your schedule, I got a course of sleeping pills for 2 weeks just to reset my sleep schedule. And that's it. They work. Now, I usually only take them for 5 to 7 days because I'm still paranoid, but it's enough, right? I get back into sleeping a full night, and this is the time of year where I sometimes have to do it. But getting good sleep, fundamental. And if your brain is some sort of medieval torture device, you're not getting good sleep. So, and being fairer to yourself is not letting yourself off the hook. It's accurately assessing your capabilities at the time. So like, yeah, if you went off on someone, usually something we want to avoid, you know? If you went off on someone after they'd been, say, screaming at you for an hour, different setting, right? And there's an example of you don't just ignore the fact you made me go off on you. No, because for the most part, we can't walk away. That's something I keep working on getting better at. And I know there are a lot of people that watch my content that can really relate because we're introverts. That, you know, I'm fortunate to have a decent, number of fairly close friends. I have an unusual number of close friends for an introvert. I understand that, a lot of introverts have maybe 2 or 3. And that's where we're happiest, right? We want to be able to invest really intensely in a smaller number of people because we want those really deep connections. Whereas more extroverted people are more social butterflies. They're okay with having, this sort of group of 12 to 15 people. And there's no right or wrong there. It is just different. The challenge for introverts is that every loss of a friend cuts way deeper because we have fewer of them. And so we sort of try to control what we can't control through trying to be the most perfect friend who ever friended. And we can't be. And that's the thing. We do have to recognize that everybody has limits. Everybody has elements that might be inconveniences for other people. And that's the point where people start going, oh, I have to fix those because then they won't leave me. And the truth is that you can be a goddamn paragon. I mean, look at how many people were like, oh, Superman, he's not relatable, right? The more you try to be perfect, the more you risk people not, people being afraid to show you when they're struggling because, believe it or not, they might feel like, well, they're embarrassed to lean on other people because you never lean on them, right? And that this is something that we can flip the script on regarding self-blame, regarding perfectionism. Think about it, right? How do you feel when a friend comes to you when they're having a tough time? You feel useful, right? You feel helpful. Or you feel helpless because you wish there was something you could do, And if you're feeling helpless because you wish like there was something you can do, listening is often the best thing you can do. Just making it so that person doesn't have to carry the emotional burden alone. And sometimes it's just as simple as going, look, you're a good person. I know you're a good person. Nobody's perfect, but I know your intentions and they're good. I don't know of a single person that I know who hears that too much. Even that can be, and so there's things you can do, but you want to be there for other people, right? So are you letting other people be there for you? That's something you can work on more, and this is something that's uniquely challenging for me to do because sometimes, I have to worry about something not being my secret to tell because of the various work I do. Whether it's, a creative project that is struggling, but that's not public knowledge yet, or, an event where it's the week before the event and that's when everything goes wrong. So Oktoberfest went great, by the way. Increased numbers, increased donations, increased number of activities. So win on all fronts. Are there things we want to improve next time? Yeah, but that's good. Knowing exactly where, okay, I know how we can make this better. I love that. I love when it's clear, okay, this is our key focus for improvement next year. Because then it's just like, okay, we don't have to faff around with things. It's like this laser focus on improving this, all these other things will come into line. I love when it's obvious, right? And that's the other thing about self-improvement, right? If there is a simple thing that you have to change, focus on that first. Don't try to change 5 things at once. Too many variables, too hard to know what's working or what's not, or if something is working, why, if something's not working, why. Change one variable at a time. That's science, right? So, for instance, you get overwhelmed, you lose your shit. Something I have to worry about all the time, PTSD, right? So for me, it's about trying to avoid overwhelm and trying to avoid running myself down the way I used to all the time. Longtime watchers of this channel can attest to that. And so it's like, all right, checking in. I do it weekly. How am I feeling? Am I starting to feel burned out? Addressing it when you're starting to feel burned out is actually the ideal time to do it, because then you can just back off a little and it makes a big difference, as opposed to waiting till you're totally burned out and then, you need significant amount of recovery, which is what I used to do all the time. Every time I think about the fact that I used to work 21 days straight and just sort of collapse in cycles, I'm like, wow, that was really unhealthy. I'm glad I don't do that anymore. And I hear a lot of people my age go, oh, I'm slowing down. I can't do what I did in my 20s. I tend to respond with, I shouldn't have done what I did in my 20s. Maybe if I'd paced myself like I do now in my 20s, I wouldn't have an autoimmune disease. And that kind of kills the conversation, but it's true, right? So don't think of it as slowing down. Think of it as smartening up. Because once you get some equilibrium and once you get okay with, having the difficult conversations sooner before the thing becomes a crisis, and okay, you are only one part of that. More on that in a bit. But, when you realize that you get more done working less hours when you're not burned out, all of a sudden, the efficiency, the productivity matters more to you than, working hard. And there's no trade-off for it. A lot of people think, okay, I'm so efficient, I'm just going to do more. No, that's when you start becoming less efficient, right? It's okay to figure out how you work best and play to that strength. And that's another major thing about self-blame and how to step away from it. It is, again, that kind of accountability gone haywire of everybody's aware, nobody's perfect. We all have weaknesses, it's like, work on your weaknesses. Okay. But if you don't know what your strengths are to use as a guide map, or as I call it, a tomato plant stake. You ever grown tomatoes? You need to put a stake for the tomato plant to grow up around, because otherwise they just fall on the ground and rot. And if you're trying to work on your weaknesses without playing to your strengths, that's what happens. That stake that holds up the tomato plants or the green beans or pick the grapevines, whatever. If you don't have that, all you do is roll around in circles. You never grow. because you're just correcting and then correcting and correcting, and you overcorrect, and there's a bazillion ways to do stuff wrong. There's an ideal way for you to get it right. And the way you understand how to get it right is, okay, how am I at my best? What are things I like about myself, or what are things I'm good at? And the problem is, if you've been in abusive environments, people will call you the opposite of what your actual strengths are. Something I fight with a lot is that I am, I care about people. And so people mock, she says she's too nice. Yeah. But it's true. Being too nice is not a good thing. But of course, people who know me well enough to manipulate me will call me mean or cruel or something like that to try to just, and try suggest it's intentional. I think with some people it's instinctive. It's the way they talk to themselves, and so they do it to other people. But they just call you the opposite of a good quality you have to get you to do what they want you to do. And this is when intentionality becomes a challenge, because that's another reason to not blame yourself, to be fairer to yourself, because our negative self-talk tends to leak out into other people. If you're walking around going, if I'm not perfect, everybody's going to leave me, you may be giving other people the impression that if they're not perfect, they say the wrong thing, they do the wrong thing, that's going to be it. Because people tend to pick up on stuff like that on like a mirror neuron, very lizard brain kind of level. And so, and this is not intended to freak anybody out. This is just, this is true. The best way to make people uncomfortable around you, just be uncomfortable with yourself. And I know, how do I just snap my fingers and do that? But you can't. But there are things you can be more comfortable with, right? I know with a lot of people I work with, I get them talking about certain subjects and they become decisive and confident and secure, right? You get them talking about themselves, they're a fucking mess. So I'll try to steer conversations towards the stuff they're more secure talking about, both as a confidence building exercise, but also to sort of observe them at their best. And so that's their baseline. And so if I start hearing more halting speech, bowed heads, anything like that, I know, we need to recalibrate something. But also just getting out of your own head and just feeling okay for 45 minutes in a week, that in and of itself is worthwhile, because that's a baseline for you. You can feel it. And that's feedback, right? It's very important to focus, even if you have 5 minutes in a day, that you feel okay. That's important to take note of, because what's going on there? And a lot of people will be like, well, I'm playing video games. Okay. So what is it about playing video games that is sort of the highlight of your day? And a lot of people will say, well, it's fun, but it also gives me a sense of accomplishment. Okay. So that's what we introduce into other tasks. A sense of fun and a sense of accomplishment. And that's just basic self-esteem building. It's okay. Anything that requires effort doesn't have to be Herculean. If everybody had to do like massive achievements to be happy, most of the population would be miserable. Now you may be saying most of the population is miserable, but what they've actually found is that happiness begets achievement. Achievement doesn't make you happy. There's always another mountain to climb. And so making the journey, enjoyable, that's the goal. And that was something I learned way too late. I was so results driven, and you can't control results. I mean, my God, it's Oktoberfest last weekend. Last Friday. Friday was game 6? Game 5 of the American League Championship Series. And of course, the Jays are in it. So until the game was over, like, the place was a dead zone. People showed up, later. But, I mean, did it impact attendance? Yeah. Could we have known the Jays were going to make the World Series when we booked the event? No, we booked this thing in the summer. There's no way to know that. And so, and even if we could, those games are, they're last minute. Nobody knows. So these are things we can't control. And that's why you have measurables like, donations, and attendance was up even with that. That's a real achievement considering the headwinds, right? And so that's the thing. We can compare ourselves to perfection, or we can compare ourselves to the reasonable goals we set. What can we control? Better run of show, more activities to do, better production. Attendance in Toronto, always hit or miss, but the point was the donations and, the clothing donations were very generous again. That's it. That's the reason we do it. All the ego aside, homelessness is way up because of economic headwinds in the GTA. That's why we do it. Everything else, awesome. That's what really matters. And focusing on those goals that you can control. So even if the things that you can't control just go freaking sideways, you can look at the part you could and gone, yep, that we did improve on that. And that's something we could do something about. And since that worked, all right, our instincts are right, keep building. You see how that works? If you're blaming yourself and trying to control things that you can't control, you're not properly separating what you can control from what you can't control, because you've taught yourself this false narrative that you can control everything. You can control other people. You can stop people from heel turning. You can stop people from leaving you. You can stop people from betraying you, and you can't. That's why it's a betrayal. And people change. Sometimes they do. They have health issues that affect their perception. They get bitter. They fall on hard times, don't handle it themselves well, and so they withdraw because they're ashamed of themselves. And while you're experiencing it as, I'm losing a friend, my friend is pulling away from me, they're experiencing it as, I don't want to be around people, I'm so ashamed of myself, or something like that. You see the cycle of like self-blame and self-shame and all that stuff, and how it just spreads. So if you can be the one that goes, okay, I'm not going to play that game, right? I'm going to, for me, I may go, that's funny. Somebody's gotten really quiet, and I'll actively tell myself, like, I hope everything's okay with them. I use my caring for other people to not make it about me, and do things like, hey, maybe they're going through a hard time at work, or they're dealing with a medical issue or something like that, and go, okay, maybe I should just reach out and go, like, hope everything's okay, or maybe just give them some space, or, use that selfless inclination to make it not about you. If it is about you, you'll find out, but there's nothing you can do about it because you don't know what it is. And so there's no point in speculating. And I'm telling you, speculating, like, predicting doom doesn't make the doom easier to handle. You know, when I think of it, I saw that coming, you know, and I didn't swerve. To me, that's worse than I had at what? No, that was not in my mind at all. It's no better to see the train coming. You just feel dumber when it hits. And so that doesn't mean be completely blind to the signals you're getting. But like I said, someone gets quiet. Don't assume it's necessarily about you, you know, unless you know you're letting them down somehow. If you're getting a guilty conscience, you know, don't just sit there and feel bad. Do something about it. If you knew you're supposed to get something to someone and you didn't, solve that problem. If you promise something to somebody and you're 2 weeks late, get it to them. And don't be mad. Like, recognize, yes, I slacked there. Yes, I let them down here. This is in my power to control. So let's do it. Thing about self-blame is you realize, oh, I promised that to this person 2 weeks ago. I'm behind. Instead of going, I better get that done, which is accountability. It's, oh, I'm so stupid. Oh, I'm such a bad friend and it's hopeless. I'm never going to be able to get this done. They hate me now. You know what you're not doing? You're not solving the problem. You can't do anything about the past. You can. The smartest thing to do with something like that is take the initiative to go, I know I am late. And if you're so full of self-blame that you are choking on it, you can't do it. The biggest buck passers I know are people who hate themselves because they can't take that one more drop of bad feeling. So they'll be, you never said anything. You didn't say it was late. A person shouldn't have to be on you and on you and on you. You should know when your deadlines were and be responsible for them. Don't flip the blame. You didn't remind me. You didn't this. Stop making excuses, right? Because those are excuses. And those come from feeling so shitty about yourself that you can't go, yep, you're right. I messed up because it's, you know, we're coming up on that. I call it time travel week. That wonderful period of the year where time zones in one part of the world, I mean, Australia already changed their clocks a few weeks back, but the UK and Europe go back an hour. We don't until the next week. So that is a scheduling freaking nightmare. And so there are going to be hiccups. There are going to be kerfuffles. It's kind of stressful. It's confusing for everybody. And it is nobody's fault. It happens every year. And we just get through it. And there's no point in me kicking myself every time something isn't sufficiently communicated because, hey, I got 22 appointments right this week. Why am I, kicking myself for the one ball that got dropped? That's a pretty good, like if that was a professional baseball batting average, that'd be amazing, right? People aren't even breaking 300 anymore. And that's the sort of thing. Are you comparing yourself to perfection? Or are you comparing yourself to what's reasonable or what you would expect from other people? And if you have really, really low expectations of other people, raise your standards. Seriously. It helps a lot. Because if you've got, standards for other people who are here and standards for yourself that are way up here, you're not treating yourself well. And you're not valuing yourself. Because if every person in your life deserves that, and you think you only deserve that, you're saying you deserve less than other people. And you may think that's true. You may think that you made huge mistakes in the past, but there is a certain floor on that. There are certain things that everybody deserves. And there are certain things that nobody deserves just because they're human beings. And if you don't, set those standards as inviolate, nobody deserves to just be left hanging on something. It happens sometimes. But you got to be diligent so that somebody gives you the benefit of the doubt of like, look, they're not normally like this, so something's already happened. They're less likely to be mad at you there, right? Whereas if you're constantly like flaking and you come back and people are like, wow, okay, it took you long enough, and you blow up at them, no, you're not going to get the grace, Sometimes just apologizing, but not over apologizing. Sincere is better than theatrical. Seriously, that's a video for another time. But a sincere apology, like, yep, I'm late, I'm working on it, I'm sorry, is better than, I'm so bad, because you hit a certain point where you give somebody this big text dump, it comes across as you expecting them to go, there, it's okay, and maybe in that moment it's not. And the person needs the space for it to be not okay for 5 seconds, so it can be okay again. You see how everything is sort of an inversion of the pre-existing self-talk that we've been taught? Like, perfectionism is impossible, so if that's our expectation, we're always going to fall short. Whereas, and if we're terrified of people being even the slightest bit irked at us, that's also an issue, because we're not letting people have that moment to be irritated and frustrated, even angry, so they can go, okay, I've had that feeling, I've processed it, all right. You gotta give people that space so that they can go, all right, I'm through it. I had my moment. Cool. Right? Sometimes it's really that simple. But if you are so full of self-blame, you are so convinced that you are so garbage that everybody is eventually going to abandon you, or if you are so unstable in terms of who you are that somebody saying you did a bad thing registers in your mind as you are a bad person, I guarantee you're boomeranging that harshness. It rattles around in your head and goes flying like a hammer throw at the other person. So the best thing you can do if you got a fear of abandonment, the best thing you can do if you're afraid, your friends secretly hate you, is set reasonable expectations, get more in an equilibrium so you show up not vibrating anxiety, right? Anxiety has its place. New experiences comes with anxiety. Learning new things comes with a bit of anxiety. Hanging out with your friends shouldn't be a potential crisis. And everybody involved in that deserves better than that ordeal. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Cares session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching and be well.